Hi, I'm Will Webb and welcome back to my 2018 rundown of the best and worst films that came out this year. We've already talked about my favourite films of 2018 in a previous video, so if you haven't seen that then do give that a watch. And now we're going to talk about the worst films that came out this year. This one's probably a lot easier because I don't have to be nice about them, so, you know, that's a plus. First off, Venom. The only thing that's really clear for me in my recollection of Venom is that Tom Hardy is having a lot of fun with it, and I think that was my overriding impression of the good parts of the film. Unfortunately, there's the whole rest of it. From terrible Elon Musk, played by a very much wasted Riz Ahmed, to forgettable love interest, who actor I have forgotten. For me, the most perplexing thing is that I see Venom really as being a character who is inextricably linked to Spider-Man. And so any Venom film that's standalone that doesn't have even a mention of Spider-Man in it fundamentally doesn't make sense for me as a character. And that problem is really apparent in this film. I mean, Venom works best not maybe as a villain directly, but as an anti-hero at the least. He has to have someone else to play off. And then we have Venom, where Venom's like the good guy and his baddie is like a terrible version of Elon Musk that's covered in the same kind of goo that he is. Nothing in the film has any stakes that I care about because I don't like the characters and I'm not really made to be interested in them. And it's full of plot holes. I still haven't worked out what that Malaysian lady was doing in kind of all the time that she was possessed by the symbiote over in Malaysia, but just like hung out for what, 6 months or something like that? She was just chilling. Or maybe she was just working a minimum wage job to get a plane ticket, which seems kind of questionable for someone who could just like absorb themselves into other people's bodies. I mean, wouldn't you just go to the airport? I'm giving it too much air. The problem is a bad movie like this, it's not worth talking about what went wrong in the plot when there's so much that's wrong with the whole craft of the film overall. It's impossible to think about plot holes in a film that sucks this bad. Oh wait, sorry, no, I remember now, that's not actually the problem with the film. The problem was that the movie was fine, but the critics are too old. I'm 26, and the age limit for people who are supposed to be able to legally watch the film is 15, right? So there's only 11 years worth of people who can appreciate that movie, right? Because presumably by the time you turn 26, you don't like the film, because I didn't, and I'm a critic, and therefore I was too old to understand the movie. So I guess what the filmmakers were doing was aiming to make a film for people between the ages of 15 and 25, because that was like, I don't know, a sweet spot for their market, and literally no one else will enjoy the film and or be legally able to watch it. I don't know, it seems like a weird business decision to me. All I remember was that banging theme song. Hey guys, can you put on the Venom theme song, the one that Eminem did for some reason? Thanks. Truth or Dare was another Blumhouse teens do dumb things and die in horrible ways movie. Except the weird thing is that making these movies really accessible to teenagers has actually made them really bloodless as well. So the movie's got plenty of carnage in it, but ultimately it's not that scary and it's certainly not very visceral. Probably the worst thing that happens is that someone falls off a pool table and breaks their neck. Yeah, that's another weird thing that happens in these movies and also in like Final Destination films, is everyone's bones seem to be like super weak. Truth or Dare's genius plot concerns a group of teenagers who find themselves cursed by a demon, but not just any demon, a Mexican demon, because they're on holiday in Mexico when it happens. After that, they're cursed to see people with Snapchat filters on their faces and then die by accident or in horrible ways. Not the most compelling story in the world, but then again, I guess that'll happen when you try and make a childhood game into a horror movie. Nothing worked in this film. None of it was scary, in fact most of it was funny, especially the heinous ending, which was not served by the preceding 2 hours or so of terrible plot. The effects weren't scary, the setups weren't scary, the characters weren't compelling, nor were they well performed. It's a failure of a film in every single possible thinkable sense. But one thing I can say in its favour is that I had a blast watching it, mostly because it was so terrible. And I think my audience did too. If you want to see more detail about Truth or Dare, check out my review of it on this channel. I'm literally like, I'm just sitting here racking my brain trying to think of something notable about Truth or Dare, but that was kind of the worst thing about it. It was intensely bland, like there really wasn't anything to take notice of. One thing I really liked about Truth or Dare and actually that I thought was really clever, was that they'd obviously done a lot of research on the film. And by they, I mean like the 40-year-olds and up who wrote the film, because they were very clear about how one would use Facebook Messenger anonymously, and they constantly had the characters explain how to anonymously use Facebook Messenger to message people. So that was really good that we understood that, because as I know a lot of teenagers who use Facebook a lot, and I also liked that they really reached out to their teenage audience by having all of the demons become like Snapchat filters for some reason. I thought that was really clever, actually, and actually like a really good symbol for the movie and for the horror and for the teens. One thing this film did really remind me of was a film called Friend Request, which is currently on Netflix if you want to watch something terrible. Both of the films dealt with social media in the same way, which is to say I think that old people find social media terrifying. Truth or Dare was ultimately a forgettable and bland example of Blumhouse horror making, which is to say that you just have a lot of pretty but bland teen actors kind of work their way through a couple of set deaths that are quite bloodless and are kind of orchestrated by some sort of demon or ghost, or maybe a demon ghost, who has like a kind of distorted grin type face. And you know that kind of face, it's that typical demon face that we see in everything now. And so from one Blumhouse horror film with that kind of specific demon face in it to another Blumhouse horror film with that kind of specific demon face in it, let's talk about The Nun. Ostensibly a prequel to the Conjuring films, which have been fitfully entertaining, particularly the first one. The Nun tells a largely standalone story about one of the central demons from the Conjuring cinematic universe. And if there's anything we want to get rid of in 2019 in films, I think the term cinematic universe might have to be on that list. Because I am sick of seeing films that are set in cinematic universes, and I'm sure you are. In The Nun, a novice nun, and again I'm going to go back and just say she seems like maybe one of the worst choices. You probably could have had like a more experienced nun. And a priest who is, you know, doing what people do in movies when they're religious, which is doubting their faith. They come across a demon nun in an abandoned monastery in Romania, and they have to like fight it off. What follows is an hour and a half of the protagonists making those really bad decisions that people only make in horror films, coupled with some of those really generic demon faces. There really was nothing to elevate this film beyond its extremely low aims. And in fact, my favourite thing about the movie was inadvertent, which was that it reminded me of Hammer horror film. That's right, I watched a film from 2018 and thought, wow, this reminds me of movies from like the 1960s. And not on purpose, just because it was so simplistic and so over-stylized. And that's the funny thing, if they'd done that on purpose, I would have enjoyed that kind of Hammer horror pastiche. I think that would have been quite funny and quite accessible, I suppose, as an aesthetic, quite interesting to watch. But no, it's just another boring, generic 2018 horror movie. Far from being scared or even finding it particularly funny or interesting, what the film mostly made me feel was sorry for the director, Corin Hardy. He's a UK filmmaker who's made one feature before called The Hallow, which I thought was pretty good. I kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting movie at least, but this movie is just dreadful and devoid really of any skill or ability, especially on the director's side of things. The charitable part of me wants to say the reason why the film isn't well directed is because he was overruled a lot by producer James Wan, who was relatively involved by all reports, and may have even shot some sequences in the film. But it may also just be that he's not as good as his first feature, and that's kind of it. He was supposed to direct the Crow movie, which has, God, Jason Momoa in it in the lead, because apparently there's only 4 people in Hollywood at any one time, and you can only cast them in your movies. But now it looks like that's probably off the cards. I don't know if Corin Hardy has been kicked from the project, but I don't think The Nun did as well as they wanted it to, so it wouldn't surprise me. Bit of a shame, really, that we lose possibly interesting directors through bad management from Hollywood. As ever, if you want to find out more about The Nun, you can always check the review on this very channel. I want to talk about a movie now that was so bad I didn't even review it. I watched it a couple of weeks ago. I've been quite busy with work recently, which is why the uploads on the channel haven't been so regular. And yeah, I went to go see it in the cinema because I knew it would be bad, but I thought it would be funny bad, at least. And that film is Robin Hood. Now, I'm going to actually see if I can find my notes for Robin Hood, because I definitely went and wrote them down. It's about the only thing I remember about the film. Robin Hood is yet another attempt at modernising a story without modernising its setting. So something like that really successful King Arthur film they had last year that everyone kind of universally agreed was very good. Taron Egerton in the lead, Jamie Foxx as supporting, and Ben Mendelsohn as the villain. There's also Tim Minchin in the movie for some reason. They're all kind of like capable, I think, as actors. They have sort of like enough performance to be interesting, but the movie isn't really interested in doing that. That's the problem. The whole film is just absurd in how it approaches telling the story of Robin Hood, and it's really outrageous watching it sometimes. I wasn't angry, but I was just sat there kind of bemused and sad about what they'd done. The first absurdity happens in the first couple of minutes when they recast the Crusades essentially as if they were like the Iraq or Afghanistan conflicts in this century. So they've got these like medieval versions of flak jackets on, and they've all got their bows raised and they're flanking each other and kind of like walking through like a squad and doing symbols like that. And it's just nuts, like it's absurd, it doesn't make any sense. There's a kind of lack of consistency in how they've modernised and what they've modernised. The characters are all wearing machine-stitched clothes, but I think we're supposed to think that they're from like the period that it's supposed to be set, which is like the Middle Ages. Nottingham is shown as a place that has these giant mines, and what they're mining I'm not exactly clear on. I think it's coal. Why they're mining so much coal for a pre-industrial society, I'm not totally sure, but the film seems happy to have that as a setting. The Sheriff of Nottingham is kind of recast as this dictator figure, like a populist dictator who wears this big silvery leather trench coat, which again, what? That doesn't make much sense to me. The lack of consistency even goes so far as to affect the accents. I'm not sure exactly what Jamie Foxx's was supposed to be, but it certainly isn't that, at least not for a majority of the film's runtime and not regularly. Like at one point, they're just literally wearing t-shirts while they're training. And it's like, is this set in the Crusades times, or do you just not care? Like, I don't understand what the thinking was with this. It's not like this fun stylistic thing like the singing in A Knight's Tale or the anachronisms in Marie Antoinette. It just doesn't work. There's no thinking behind why they've modernized what they've modernized. And even getting away from what they just did wrong, what they're intending to do is kind of dumb. There's a scene where Robin gets back from the Crusades and then sees Marion with another man, and he's so shocked by it that he vomits. Like, he just goes and vomits in a side alley, and it's like, what? How is that a reaction that's warranted by that situation? It doesn't seem like something that he would do even. He doesn't do it ever again in the film or whatever. And likewise, near the end of the film, as a symbol of the revolution that Robin Hood is leading, which, by the way, is how this goes, which is just the dumbest thing, people start cutting off hoods and nailing them up around the town. But I don't know if you've ever just seen a hood on its own. It's just like a piece of cloth. So they're just like nailing cloth bits around the town. And it's like, yeah, the symbol of the hood. Like, it doesn't work fundamentally in any way or sense whatsoever. I think, just from a pure mechanical sense, it's probably the worst film I've seen this year. And you can see that reflected in its Rotten Tomatoes score. Not something I like to think about that often, but it's at 16%, you know, that's not great. Almost getting to the end of the video, gang. Almost time for me to go out and enjoy the sunshine. I mean, I'm not filming this in July, this is definitely now. Last but certainly not least, we have The Cloverfield Paradox. Now, the funny thing about this film is that I think they almost set themselves up for a fall with that really hyped way that they introduced it. It got a huge trailer at the Super Bowl, and then it was online on Netflix immediately following the Super Bowl. So they were saying to everyone, here's this amazing, really cool looking trailer. Go and see this film right now. You can see it in your homes immediately after you finish watching the big game. Well, I don't watch American football, so I didn't see it in that context, but I did watch the film about a week later, and it was incredibly, incredibly disappointing. Cloverfield, pretty good movie. Cloverfield Lane, pretty good movie. Cloverfield Paradox, poof, boy howdy. So it turns out with this that they didn't really originally plan for it to be a Cloverfield film. It was retroactively decided to be a Cloverfield film, basically so that people would actually watch it or that anyone would want to buy it. And I'm pretty sure it was premiered on Netflix simply because they knew that the money that Netflix would pay them would be more than they would lose on marketing it and releasing it in cinemas. The film starts on Earth and has these really poorly acted exposition scenes where they explain that Earth is kind of undergoing an energy crisis. And then it immediately cuts into this long title sequence that's basically like a montage of them setting up some kind of like Large Hadron Collider or something, but in space, in a space station to do energy stuff with. I don't really... I'm not going to give it the air. Basically, when they turn on this particle accelerator thing, it rips a hole in time and space and different dimensions and stuff. And so everyone's atoms start being like weird. Is basically like the closest thing this gets to the science in science fiction. Most notably, someone's arm gets like chopped off and then starts like kind of coming after him because it's being controlled by the him from another dimension, I think. And that's kind of when I decided I wasn't gonna get too stressed about the plot of the film and just enjoy it for the ride that it was. And it was a fun ride. To hell. Bad as the stuff on the space station is, at least it has good actors like Chris O'Dowd, David Oyelowo, Gugu Mbatha-Raw, and Daniel Bruhl. You know, they're all capable actors who know how to turn a scene. And so, although the plot doesn't work, its themes aren't interesting, and there's no real believable stakes, and all the dialogue is terrible, it almost feels kind of watchable because they've spent enough money on shooting it that it looks like vaguely well executed and well designed, and the actors are kind of having a good attempt at making the scenes work. The stuff on Earth is a totally different story. Where the stuff in space is slow-paced, the stuff on Earth grinds to a halt. Like, it is unbelievably badly performed and written. And yet, those should be the more exciting and contemporary moments in the film, because they're dealing with this apocalyptic environment on Earth as well. And then last but not least, to add insult to injury, they have the most outrageous ending ever that directly crowbars in the original Cloverfield films. And at that point, I was just like cackling. I was just having a hugely fun time watching the film because it is so appallingly badly executed. And that's why I like talking about these bad films, you know. Most of the films that come out in the cinemas have this kind of certain level of quality in order to be able to get to a cinema. You know, someone has to have spent a couple of $1 million on it. It has to be shot relatively well with the standard nice cameras and nice lenses. What happens with a bad film that gets into cinemas is that something goes deeply wrong in the writing process or in the acting process or in the directing process, and you just get the real fun of watching something that looks and smells like a proper movie but 100% is terrible. And I feel like you can really learn something from talking about those bad films. It's not just about shooting fish in a barrel and making fun of terrible stuff, although it definitely is partially about that. But what we can really do with those movies is learn about the direct and important parts of filmmaking that people sometimes gloss over in favor of talking about production values. When you just talk about production value, you end up with films like The Cloverfield Paradox that fundamentally don't have a reason to exist, aren't well made, aren't well, put together, basically. And that means we can learn a lot about filmmaking from watching films that are that bad. But anyway, I've been talking for so long that my Christmas party has actually turned into a New Year's party. And I'm sure that just like me, you've got lots of friends standing just behind the cameras that you probably have in your houses too, right? Just waiting for you to come over and join them for having fun, food, nibbles and drinks, and shouting at Jools Holland on TV. But before you go, I just want to say thank you so much for watching the channel throughout 2018 and really engaging in a lively and interesting conversation in the comments about film. My favourite thing about the channel is talking to you all at home about films and really having those conversations with you in the comments. And so it's been great that you've been there and you've also been tolerant of me not uploading when I've been busy or moving house or whatever. So as we've hit a milestone with the 3,000 subscriber mark, I just want to thank you all hugely for your work across 2018 in watching the videos and talking about them respectfully and kind of in intellectual and clever and engaged ways in the comments. And I can't wait to carry on doing that in 2019. That's it from me. Bye for now and have a happy new year.